leave the church, that hopefully they stay Christians, and hopefully they don't die. And then you die, and that's where everything gets really good. That's where your purpose really comes in. That's what we're made for, is life after all of this. And I think when you look at that, at kind of my perspective of what our purpose was, it really makes sense the way that I was living. I was totally aimless. I felt like the one box I needed to check, be a Christian. I was like, well, I call myself that, so I guess check. I guess I got it. I don't know what to do next. And it was aimless. And that all changed in 2014. I'm so grateful that it did. I had a guy who was my boss. His name was Seth Carter, and he sat me down and he shared with me about both the Great Commission, which is found in Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20. He also shared with me this really seemingly unremarkable verse in the book of 2 Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2. It's really easy to remember. It's just all twos. 2 Timothy 2:2. And in 2 Timothy 2:2, Paul is writing to Timothy and he says, hey, the things that you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, I want you to entrust those things to faithful men and women who will then be qualified to go out and train others. Seth shares with me, and initially that was not like a life-changing event, but then he kind of broke that down for me and helped me to understand that for the Christian, for the follower of Jesus, if we trace even what Paul said in 2 Timothy all the way back to what Jesus said in Matthew 28, Jesus is saying part of the core DNA of what it means to be a follower of him is to go and make new disciples, to go and teach other people, to go and make new learners of Jesus. And Jesus did not say to make new converts, which was kind of my understanding growing up. You just hit them with the Bible verses and then they become a convert, and then you're on to the next guy. That's not what Jesus is talking about. He's saying you're making disciples, learners, people who need to be taught. And so this totally changed my life. I began to understand that my life has a purpose that is deeper than just what I do every day. Because the cool thing about the purpose of being, at least in this area, a disciple maker, is that you can do it anywhere, as long as there are people. So maybe that excludes Antarctica. I've heard there are a few people there, some scientists doing some stuff. So that even there, I don't think it's totally out of the question. But this is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And so when I got that purpose after 2014, you can see a marked difference in the way that I live my life, what my life looked like. And I think this is so important for us. And my hope is that in sharing that story, maybe some of you feel the same way that I did before 2014. Kind of feel like you've been going along, and maybe you are a Christian, or maybe you're not, but to you, the idea of being a Christian seems kind of nebulous. Like, I don't really know what I'm doing. If so, I'm grateful that you're here. This sermon series, this last couple of months, has been perfect for us to go through and find these things that Jesus said, this is why I'm here. And I want to encourage you to know that that's also why you're here. Maybe you feel like I did post 2014, like maybe you've got that solidarity. I know what I'm here to do. Maybe you had a moment like that, and now it's kind of drifted a little bit. That happens too. That's happened to me over the course of the years too. You begin to drift. You look at other things, you look at other people and the way that they talk about their purpose, and you kind of wonder, am I doing what I ought to be doing? Does this make sense? Or maybe you're in here and you feel like you just know. Like, yep, I've got it, solid. I know what my purpose is. I'm living it out. This stuff is encouraging, but I'm on the right track. Great. Let's all move forward in that together. Make that happen. So with that, again, this part of what we're talking about in this part of the series is one of Jesus' statements. So I want to get to that statement, because wherever we land, wherever we're at, I think Jesus doesn't want us to stay there and stay just plateauing there. He wants us to keep going further up and further in. So let's read together what it is that Jesus is saying, and then we'll get down into that. So I want to read the whole thing, verses 32 through 52. and then we'll kind of go back through and break it down a few chunks at a time. And then, yeah, we'll see where we went at the end. So Mark chapter 10, starting in verse 32. We're going to go all the way through verse 52. Now they, the disciples, Jesus, were on the way going up to Jerusalem. And Jesus was going ahead of them. And they were amazed, while those who followed were fearful, which I think is part of what's going on before this. So before this, Jesus has been telling them about what it means to be a disciple. You can even go all the way back to chapter 9, and you can see that Jesus is extrapolating on what it means to be a follower of Jesus, the cost of discipleship, the upside-down kingdom, how it's different than the default settings of this world, and how you've got to be different, and how he can make you different. And so this is happening all kind of rapid fire, and so these guys are a little freaked out, rightfully so, by it. It sounds like a lot of responsibility. So to add to that, Jesus took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was going to happen to him. He said, "Look, we're going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be handed over to the ruling priests and the lawyers, and they will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit on him, scourge him and kill him. Yet, after 3 days, he will rise again." Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, come up to him saying, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And Mark is being really nice by not adding the fact that it's James and John's mother. It's like encouraging them to go do this. We find that out in Matthew, but nice of Mark. He just kind of puts that one under the rug. Gives a little face for him. And Jesus said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" But they said to him, "Let us sit, one on your right and one on your left, in your glory." But Jesus answered them, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup I drink, or endure the baptism that I must endure?" And they said to him, "Yeah, we're able." And Jesus said to them, "Well, you will drink the cup I drink, and you will endure the baptism I must endure. But to sit on my right or left is not mine to grant. It's for those for whom it has been prepared." Now, when the other 10 disciples heard this, they started to get angry with James and John. So calling them all over, Jesus said to them, "You know those recognized as rulers of the nations lord it over them, and their great ones play the tyrant over them. Yet it is not this way among you. Whoever wants to be great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Then they came to Jericho. Now, as Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd, Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out, "Son of David, Jesus, have mercy on me." Many were warning him to be quiet, but he kept crying out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." So Jesus stopped and said, "Call him over." So they called the blind man, saying, "Take heart, get up, he's calling you." And throwing off his cloak, he jumped up and came to Jesus. And answering him, Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see again." So Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." And instantly he regained his sight and began following Jesus down the road. Okay, so as I was preparing for this, I don't know how this happened exactly. I mean, I told Evan which passage I wanted, but I didn't realize that it lined up really well with what I was teaching my students at Campus Ventures. So this last Thursday, I taught through Mark 9, end of Mark 9, and I felt like it was just deja vu. I felt like I was reading the exact same thing, and I was feeling a little bit like I was going to be bringing almost the same message. I think it's different now, but at the time, I was feeling a little bit nervous about it. And so I want to point out some things to you guys as we go through these. But if you would maybe sometime go back and read Mark chapter 9 and Mark chapter 10 together. it's crazy to me how similar these two chunks of scripture are. And I think that repetition is there for a reason. I think it's important. But we only have time to really go through a bit of this. So let's start with verses 32 and 34 again, and look at this, what Jesus is saying. So verse 32 and 34 says, they were on the way going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was going ahead of them. They were amazed, while those who followed were fearful. Again, Jesus took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was going to happen to him. So Jesus has done this before. Back in chapter 9, he had just done this. He does this to the disciples multiple times because he wants them to know what's going to happen when he dies. He wants them to not be surprised by this. And I feel kind of bad for the disciples. I feel like we give them a hard time sometimes because we sometimes think that they were like kind of dumb or they were a little slow. But man, Jesus used a lot of metaphors and similes and things that were meant to be taken metaphorically. So I don't blame these guys that he needed to tell them over and over again. No, like literally, I am going to die. And I imagine back in chapter 9, they're like, yeah, probably like sleeping. He's talking about sleeping again. That's what he's saying. But no, so he keeps doing this over and over again. And I think that's important, that Jesus reiterates that he's going to die. He does this multiple times. It's important. He doesn't want the disciples to be surprised by this. He wants them to know this is part of the plan. This is part of what I've come here to do. So Jesus is in 32 through 34 declaring his mission. So coming back to 33, he said, look, we're going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man, Jesus, will be handed over to the ruling priests and the lawyers, and they will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit on him, scourge him and kill him, and yet after 3 days he will rise again. So Jesus starts telling them about this is what I'm here to do, what the plan is. The plan is for me to die. Also, the plan is for me to rise up from the dead and conquer death. And so I wonder about this then, what happens next? James and John, I don't know if they're just taking what he's saying lightly again, or if they're taking him really seriously and saying, oh, okay, this is part of the plan. This means that we're on track for the plan. We're on our way to Jerusalem. So that means that Jesus is about to enter into his glory somehow. And I don't totally understand. I don't know if they're saying this from a place of like they kind of get it, that Jesus is going to rise from the dead and then they get to be right hand, left hand, or if they're still taking it sort of metaphorically and they just want to be right hand, left hand. Whatever it is, James and John are doing kind of the opposite in some ways of what Jesus instructed them to do in chapter 9. In chapter 9, Jesus told the disciples who were arguing amongst themselves who was the greatest. He says, hey, I heard what you guys were talking about back there. I want you to know that the greatest of you has to be the least. The greatest has to be the one who's willing to serve the rest. And we flip a page and we get to James and John, and they're saying, hey, can we be at the left and right of you? Can we be like the greatest? Can we be your right hand and left hand guy? And so Jesus, in this section, in verses 35 through 45, both corrects and clarifies for his disciples. So here, starting in 35, it says, James and John, sons of Zebedee, come to him saying, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? This is a good question for you to ask yourself. Well, what do you want from Jesus? That's twice, at least in chapter 10, that he asked this question. Once to the disciples, and then once to the blind man. Have you ever thought about that question for yourself? If Jesus were to come up to you face to face and say, what do you want? How would you answer him? I struggle with that one a little bit. I think it's a good question. So they say, let us sit, one on your right hand, one on your left, in your glory. And Jesus says, you don't really know what you're asking here. And they say, yeah, we do. We understand. We get it. And Jesus says, well, no, you don't, but you are going to experience the things that you're asking for. You're going to get what you're asking for, at least in some ways. You're going to suffer like I suffer. But my right hand and left hand aren't for me to decide. And then the other disciples get really angry, right? Maybe they're getting angry because James and John don't seem to be listening to Jesus from chapter 9. Maybe they're just upset because they didn't think of this first. I don't know. I don't know what exactly it is. But they come and they're upset that James and John would ask this. And Jesus tells them, you know, in order to be a leader amongst the Gentiles, so you look at every other nation, and we can apply this to us too, right? We can apply this to America as well. In order to be a leader generally here, you've got to be considered really great. And what can happen is leaders then tend to be tyrants. They lord it over the people that they're leading. They abuse the people that they're leading. Jesus says, for you, that is not to be the case. Whoever wants to be first among you needs to be the slave of all, the servant of all. And then he gives this big statement, which I want us to pay attention to. This is the focus of this message, right? He says, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served. He came to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. This is not new for God. It's not new for Jesus. He's not doing this just as an inconvenient response to us. I want you to think back to the book of Genesis. Think back to the beginning of history, the story as it starts in Genesis. We have in the first couple of chapters the creation story, and everything is really good. God says, this is really good. And then in Genesis chapter 3, we have the fall of mankind. Adam and Eve disobey God. I want you to think about this for a second, because I think God could have, probably in all rights, said, okay, scrap this, I'm starting over. Or maybe just scrap it and I'm done. I don't want to do this. If God was a God who only wanted to be served from the very beginning, he would have, I think, shut it all down. Genesis 3 would have been the end. But even from the very beginning, the character that we see in God, that he's a God who desires to serve. He's a God who's humble, who has a commitment to being with us so great that he's willing to serve the people who rejected him. And so we see this purpose of Jesus's, that he came to serve, and that he came to set his life as a ransom for many. And it traces all the way back to Genesis 3. Isn't that crazy? That's his character all the way from the beginning. And so we see Jesus doing this over and over again, right? He's communicating the importance of us understanding what it means to be a servant. This happens here. It happens multiple times. He just changes the wording in chapter 9. You guys probably heard these phrases, right? He who wants to be great needs to be the least. He who wants to be first must be the last. He who wants to be the greatest must be the servant of all. Jesus keeps reiterating this over and over and over again. And if he felt the need to repeat it to the disciples, I feel like it's probably important that we remind ourselves of this as well too. And so we have Jesus doing this. He declares his mission. He wants them to be aware of what he's doing. He gives some correction and clarity. It's not wrong to seek greatness. You just need to have a great definition of what greatness is. And Jesus says greatness comes through service. I was remarking to the students on Thursday that there's a lot of, I've been reading some like business books, or just like how do you maybe start a business, or how do you keep a business going? And I've been amazed between the videos that I've watched and the books that I've read, how many times this concept of serving others has come up. And people are like, traditionally we always thought about business as like you gotta focus more on your profit and loss. You gotta focus on cutting costs here or there. Now we're realizing that if you really want to do well in business, You need to think about how you serve the customer before you serve yourself. Like, oh, interesting. Where did you get that from? What a novel idea. That sounds kind of crazy. And over and over again, I'm hearing this. Oh, sounds great. I think someone way wiser than you made this up a long time ago. And if we had just been doing this forever, this wouldn't be some big crazy revelation. This would just be normal. And so what I love about Jesus is that he doesn't just teach, doesn't just declare and say, here's the standard. He also models it for us. Right? So he says, hey, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And the very next story is him serving somebody, taking the ability that he has to perform miracles, asking somebody the question, what do you want? And then serving this man with the thing that he needed, his sight. And though I guess it's debatable whether or not you and I have the ability to heal somebody's blindness, we can ask the same question. We can ask people, what is it that you want? And if it's in our power to help them along the way, I think that we can step into that. And that's part of what it means to be a servant. To find out what it is somebody else wants. What do they need? How do you meet that need? Can you? Or maybe you can't meet the need, but you can kind of go one little baby step. Maybe you know the person who can meet the need. Can you introduce those two people? So Jesus models this for them, and he does this multiple times. Well, you go back to chapter 9 again. Jesus is talking about children and how important it is to welcome in children. And then in chapter 10, the disciples are, for some reason, turning the children away. And Jesus says, stop that. You hear me? A chapter ago? Welcome these children in. Bring them here. I want to talk with them and bless them. And so I think that we can do some of the same things, right? When we think about what we do with this, for us, the same is true. Sacrificial service is the core of living in God's image. And as beneficial as sacrificial service can be, the benefits are to the side. The main thing that's important about that is that it makes you more like Jesus. Because that's who he was. He was a sacrificial servant. So for us to follow in with him means that we need to serve sacrificially right where we are. So I'm curious, does anybody have the ability to make more time in your day or your week? No. Probably make a lot of money if you could make something. How much do you have then? How many hours do you have in a week? Anybody know off the top of your head? How many? 68? Oh, I was like, whoa, that's way less than me. 168 hours, yeah. Yeah, that sounds right. He's always a math guy. I'm not a math guy. He's got it. 168 hours in a week. You can't make more. That's not the application. Application is not to cram more. Can't make more hours. But every single one of you has a life right now. And it's unique and different in some ways than other people's. Similar in some, but unique and different in a lot of other ways. Each of you has a sphere of influence that's different than the person sitting next to you. And so though you can't make more hours, likely you're doing something with the majority of your time in the average week, which tends out to be like 40 hours if we're talking about like a work week. More if you're Chris, because he runs his own business. So got a lot. Those 40 hours, you can't change how those work, how those shake out. You can't add more to the week. But you're already there 40 hours a week. What can you do with that time? That's different than how you're spending it right now. Who is in that 40-hour-a-week sphere that you currently know? Maybe it's you know them well, or that you're like an acquaintance. Maybe you guys are work friends or just friends. How can you find ways to serve them? We can take a page out of Jesus' playbook and ask the question, what do you want? And maybe what they want isn't good, so we shouldn't just help people do everything that they want. But if we can help find things that are good, we can do things with that. How about your time at home? Maybe you are at home full time, or when you come back from work and you're home. You have family, you have friends that you hang out with. You can't make more of that time, but you can do different things with it. You can have different conversations with those people. And maybe that's your spouse, maybe that's your kids, maybe it's friends. How do you spend that time that you have at home? Because you can't make more. You've only got 168 per week. But you can spend it better. So my challenge for you is that this concept, this idea, this sacrificial service being the core of living in God's image is something that's true, but it needs to be real. And the only way it becomes real is if we actually do it. The only way it becomes real for you is if you incorporate it into your life. And you might ask the question, well, if I'm spending all my time looking for how I can serve the needs and interests of others, how do I get mine met? Doesn't that mean that I'm on fast track to like burning out? But if everyone were to do this, if this entire room was to do this within our church, if your whole household was to do this, is anyone's needs going to be left unmet? If everyone is doing it, all the needs will be noticed and met, even the ones that I don't even know that I have. Sometimes I think I'm the expert on the needs that I have and what needs to get done. And often somebody else will come in and tell me, and I realize, oh, that's actually what I need. This is the kind of community that we need to be and become. And that comes through this concept of being a servant, asking the question to those around us, what is it that you want? And then figuring out how you can serve the needs of those nearest to you. Because if you think about that, if you were to give an intentional minute, that those minutes were to compound into hours, and then you were to give your intentional hours every week, and let that compound over the years. Really, when we look back at our lives, we don't necessarily look back at our accomplishments as the way that we measure our lives. We look at time. We look at the kind of person that we are in those little minutes, in those hours. And so if we can look for ways to utilize the minutes that we already have, sacrificially serve others over the course of time, over the course of months, and over the course of years, we'll be able to look back at our life and see a person who is modeling the life of Jesus, who looks like the image of God, who was the first and foremost and highest and best servant. Because he was willing to go to the cross. Something that even if we were willing to do, couldn't. And so maybe this seems simple, like stuff that we've all kind of heard before. That's sometimes the pressure that I feel when I look through this stuff. I'm like, I think everybody maybe knows this. Maybe. But are we doing it? And it's not enough if just one person does it. We all have to do this. We have to live this way. So my encouragement to you is, one, don't be aimless. Don't walk around like I did 2014 and before, just having one easy box that was, say I'm a Christian. Following Jesus means looking at this exact thing that we're going through. What does Jesus say his purpose is? What is he here for? And then articulating those things and saying, those are my purposes too. That's also what I'm here. And then you look for ways in your day-to-day life to incorporate those things in. And so for at least this time, between this week and next week, look for opportunities that you can ask the question, what does somebody want? What do they want? What can I do for them? How can I sacrificially serve them with the intentional hours and minutes and days that I have left? If you guys would pray with me, we'll finish up. Jesus, I thank you so much for your words. Thank you for the fact that you're the God who wants to be known by us. You're the God who wants to be near to us. That from the very beginning of time, you knew exactly what we were going to do in rejecting you and turning away from you, and yet, in spite of that, you decided to be a God who serves us. And you served us in so many ways. But the primary way is that you gave your life for us. You lived an innocent life that none of us is willing to live. You did it perfectly and right. You didn't just tell people what to do. You modeled it for them. You gave them the power to do it. That is true of us today as well. And so, Lord, I pray that we would do it, that it would be a we thing, not just a me or a singular person who does this, but that as a church, as families, as businessmen and businesswomen, as mothers and fathers, aunts and uncles, as friends, we would look to the people around us and ask them the question, what is it that you want? And when they don't know, would you help us to come alongside them and show them the good things there are? And when they do know, and it's something that is good, would you remind us that we have a place to step into that time, to sacrificially give of our time and our energy, to meet the need that they have. And I pray that as we all do that, we would see each of our needs met. We wouldn't do it for the sake of meeting our needs. We would do it to be like you, but that in doing it, we would notice the ways that you are the one who provides for all of our needs. Part of the way that you do that is through each other. And as we do, Lord, I pray that you would bless us in that you would let other people see that, those who are not yet in your kingdom. They would notice how good, amazing it is to be in a kingdom like that. That you would expand and glorify yourself through your kingdom. Pray that in your name, Jesus. Amen.
All the stars in the night, I wonder at your lightning in the sky. I shudder. Your glory is a blanket that covers every living thing. I'm in awe of the majesty of who you are. Your love is a steel burn inside my heart. And all of the day I wanna be where you are, Holy Father. Oh, when it feels like there's not enough praise inside of me, with all these words, all my heart can sing is holy, and you are holy. And Jesus, sacrifice. You let your love lay down yourself and gave me life. In naked shame you hung out, you were lifted high. And here I lay in awe and wonder. I am for no one's ever sacrifice and love is so on my face I put your heavy grace. And here I lay in awe and wonder. I wonder. I just was in the night. I wonder. I see lightning in the sky. I shudder. Your glory is a blanket that covers every living thing. I'm in awe to see who you are. Your love is a seal burned inside my heart. And all of the day I wanna be where you are, Holy Father. Oh, it feels like there's only grace inside of me. Oh, your body's born. Oh, and sing is holy. Oh, you. And Jesus Christ, you let your love lay down yourself and make me life. In naked shame you hung out, you were lifted high. And here I lay in awe and wonder. I am afraid, for no one ever sacrificed. So on my face I fall into your heavy grace. And here I lay in awe and wonder. Whoa, 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 and I wonder. Whoa, whoa, and Jesus Christ, you bled your love, laid down yourself and gave me life. In naked shame you walked as you were lifted high. And here I lay in awe and wonder. I for no one's sacrifice. So on my face I fall your heavy grace. And here I lay in awe and wonder. Oh,
we go here from this place, I think many of us, as we consider that passage that Jesus said those words where he came to serve, and the way that he served was to lay down his life. I think we can think about those things, as Justin said, and think that's too much. What about my needs? The Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 4, he encouraged us to take on the mindset of Christ, to do the work of Christ. And I think all of those same fears came to mind for the Philippians. And the Apostle Paul, he ended his letter by saying, "The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, whatever someone might respond to, "What can I do for you?" with, "What can I do for you?" Whatever their response might be, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about those things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me, or seen in me. And the apostle, he ends by saying, put that into practice. And as much as that feels like that's out of our control, or that might result in us being crushed or us not having our needs met, he says, and in doing this, the peace of God will be with you. So Common Ground Church, as you go, as you consider that the Lord has served you in these ways, and there are many ways in which he's calling you to serve others, as you put those things into practice, those which are good, those which are needed in our community, know that when you do that, peace, Christ, is with you. So as you go, would you go with that confidence that the Lord is near? We can turn to him with any and all requests. So grace and peace, Common Ground Church. Thank you for being here, and have a wonderful week.